This is Jonathan Lunger of Hologram Chat, and it's my honor and privilege to have my friend Joni McMahon here today. And Joni is a psychologist, and she also is a master teacher of the law of attraction, and also a marketer and teacher. It's great to have you here, Joni. How you doing?
I'm doing just great, Jonathan. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. So today we were going to talk about the perspective. What is your perspective on the transition of life and death and the ups and downs, and how do you feel about that?
The transition of death, when someone dies, that topic? Yeah, it's a big topic, isn't it? Huge.
Yeah.
It's probably, in this culture, in North American culture, it's a topic that's so, I think, misunderstood. And it's handled much differently in, say, a country like India. But before I get into how the Indian culture sees death, my perspective on death has come, I really believe that people learn from experience. You can read stuff in a book, but until it's actually part of your experience, there's not a deep and true knowing about something. So my whole perspective on death is very different now since my husband of many years, over 20 years, transitioned, died. It was in 1997 that he passed over. And he had been suffering from cancer for 4 years, and we had been trying everything we knew to help him stay on the planet, because he was very keen on living longer in his physical body. But anyway, before he died, even when he had cancer, even when everybody else around me could see that he was near death, I never really saw him that way. And I guess it's because when you live with somebody, you kind of get used to seeing them every day. And I never really imagined that he would die. To be honest, I always thought he would live. And we had kind of promised each other that we would die together in our rocking chairs at a very old age. And so that was always on my mind, because we had talked about that. And then when he transitioned, it took me about a week, I think, but for the first week after his death, I managed to stay in a pretty joyful state. There was so much to do, and friends were everywhere, and people were helping with his funeral is not the word that we used, his celebration of his life, I guess. We had a huge celebration of his life about, I guess 10 days after his death. But an interesting story, before his death, he had a birthday, and he died in November. He had a birthday in September, and he really wanted most of his friends to be at his birthday, because I think he knew he was dying. I didn't know he was dying. All his friends knew he was dying. So everybody came to this celebration of his birthday. And it was really like a living wake, because everybody in the room, there was probably 100 people there, took turns telling him how wonderful he was and how grateful they were and how much appreciation they had for him as a person, and how much he had benefited their life. So we had that celebration. Then he transitioned, and we had another one that was even larger, with everybody that wanted to be there. So it was after that celebration that it sunk in. People went back to their lives, and people are busy. And my whole life was completely different. We were a family of 4. We had 2 kids. My daughter was 10. My son was 15. And my husband was an amazing human being. He was absolutely a pillar in our family. He was a present father, and he was, I could never have asked for a more loving husband. And so his transition was after his life celebration, there was a sense of loss that set in that was more profound than I had ever imagined. I got catapulted into a very severe depression, and it didn't take long for that to take hold. And the thing about how our culture views death is that we think of death as when someone dies, they're gone, and there's loss. That's really how we, in our culture, see death. And that's how I was looking at death. And from that perspective, being a teacher of law of attraction now, whatever you ask for, you can have. You know, that's a teaching that's in most spiritual cultures, most religions. It's ask and it is given. And I think, Jesus was one of the first people to say that. So when someone dies and you have the belief that it's a loss, and all you want is that person to come back, there is no way to look at it except to grieve, because you're looking at it in a way that he's not coming back into physical form. And that was so foreign for me, because I had been so used to asking for things, whatever, and the universe would comply, of course, ask and it is given, and I would be receiving. So with this perspective on death, where his physical form wasn't coming back, and all I wanted was for him to come back, there was no way with that kind of thinking that the transition of him transitioning could be smooth for me, because my belief about death was faulty. And I'll explain more about that. And I wish I would have known this now, but it's really through these profound experiences that the learning happens, that you truly get it. You truly start to understand things, because I had read books on with people dying, but really, you don't really, I don't think you can grasp this kind of inner pain that happens when you have a belief like that. So we were a family of 4, and now we were like we were like a well-oiled 4-legged table, so to speak, with 2 of us being, strong pillars. And all of a sudden we were a 3-legged table, and I couldn't find a way to get my balance. I couldn't find a way to make this table solid with the thinking that I had at that time. And the experience, when you're so close to somebody that it's like everything you do, you're one, like a loving relationship. It's like you almost feel like your lives are so melded together that you can't even see yourself as separate. That's how I kind of felt. That he did so many things, just practical things, to keep our lives healthy and wonderful. And all of those things all of a sudden were on my shoulder, and I hadn't really prepared for that. I don't know how you prepare for that,
Yeah.
So and perhaps maybe now I could guide people to know some things, but he was in charge of all of our finances. He was the main cook in the house because I was working more than a full-time job, because we had decided that he would stay home and so that he could rest as much as possible in order to heal from his cancer. And so I was working as a director of a school of psychology at the time. It was a very high-pressure job. So there was a lot at work and a lot at home. And I was exhausted actually most of the time during that whole experience. And so he was in charge of everything at home. And that person who's at home is a really key person in terms of the quality of a family. And so all of a sudden, not only did I have this job, I had lost my husband as I saw that, and I was trying to cope with just fundamental things like, cooking and all of that stuff, that the finances, all of that stuff that any family needs to deal with. So I actually went into counseling right away. My friends encouraged me. They found me the best psychiatrist that they could find in my city, and she was a wonderful woman, but she didn't have a different perspective on death. And actually, the way I was counseled, it just kept entrenching the grief experience even more. And the physical pain that came from that grief experience was something I've never encountered before. It was like every cell in my body had deep sorrow pouring out of it. And it was like I couldn't be in my skin. I ended up going to a grief group just briefly, and I would ask people, does your body feel like this? And no one quite had that kind of profound body experience where the grief is just like pouring out of you. I couldn't even, I wanted to just walk out of my skin. I didn't know how to feel better. And everything reminded me of him. And this thinking that he was gone, and this depression that got launched, it just went on and on. And I'm surprised I'm even here talking about it, to be honest. It's to be on the other end of it and being able to help educate other people about my wrong thinking, really, about death, because I now understand and look at death in quite a different way. I would never respond to a death experience the way I did with my husband again. I know that because of what I now know. And what I've come to learn, and most religions do teach this, and most spiritual perspectives do teach this, is that we always have been and we always will be. We are eternal beings, and we all come from spirit. And each of us that's in physical form, that's just a small part of who we are. It's just it's like the physical extension of the huge spirit field that we are all part of, this universal intelligence. And so when someone dies, they actually just move. It's like they've just changed channels, literally. It's like, oh, okay, so I'm moving out of this life experience into another experience. It's like they've just changed their focus. And anybody can have access to this spiritual being that's in non-physical, but nonetheless very much present and well. But you have to be in positive emotion in order to access that spiritual being, because they're present. You just have to ask for them, and they will come to chat with you. And they will give you clues and messages and help all along the way. But when you're in grief and when you're in sorrow, you cannot access that. You have to be in a good feeling place to access the spirit world, the messages from spirit. And so I didn't learn that until maybe 5 years ago. And the other thing I learned was I do a form of therapy called journey work. And journey work is one of the most beneficial forms of healing, because you can actually call forth the person who's transitioned and talk with them at length and have a very deep discussion that leaves you feeling very satisfied, and like in my case, he's very much alive and well and guiding us as much as we want that. And so when I learned this form of therapy and I started to talk with my husband, I started to heal. Because one of the things that happens when a loved one dies is, and I've counseled quite a lot of people that have gone through death since, is that you're often left with things that you wish you would have said that didn't get said, times when you perhaps behaved badly and it's still on your mind, unresolved stuff that you just, didn't take the time to clean up, or you just didn't think it was important to do that, or whatever, right?
Right.
But, when somebody dies, there is some left unfinished conversations, I guess. And I would be surprised if most people didn't have those when someone that they loved transitioned. So I was able, through this work that I do now, journey work, have all of those unfinished conversations with my husband. Even though we were like as close as a couple could be, it's like I had a ton of unfinished conversations that I didn't know how to I did not know how to come to peace about until I learned the work I do now. And my husband was a photographer, and he was a very, very good photographer of nature. And there's so many times when I now see his energy around me in a butterfly or a bird. He used to love eagles and butterflies, or flowers. Those were things that he photographed all the time. And I'm now in this place of happiness most of the time. And I can literally feel his energy when I'm walking in nature. I can feel that he's present. And many of my friends who were really deep and close friends with him say the same thing. They can feel him hovering, so to speak. And so now that I understand that he really just changed focus, he's really just in non-physical, his energy is still present, and that there really is no death as we see it. There is a movement from physical to non-physical. That's as severe as it gets. But the non-physical is absolutely something we have access to if we're in a good feeling place. Because I was thinking of death as a loss, as a desire to have him back in physical form, which is, I couldn't do that. That couldn't happen. I was stuck. I literally could not find another way to look at it until I started to study about law of attraction and journey work, the work I do now. So when you change your thinking, when I changed my thinking and I really got this, all of a sudden, everything shifted. And it happened quickly. Like it did not take long for me to shift when I studied this, when I learned this. And mostly it's from the teachings of Abraham Hicks, where I really, the Esther Hicks and Jerry Hicks began the work of teaching the universe about law of attraction many years ago, about 30 years ago. And Esther speaks infinite intelligence coming through her. She's able to relax her body enough to allow the universal intelligence to speak through her. And she calls this cluster of intelligent beings Abraham. That's the name Abraham Hicks. And when they talk about death, there is no death. It's just an illusion. And it's because most of us are so detached from the spirit. And most people don't even access the spiritual aspect of life until there's a crisis, you know? Yeah. And so as soon as I got that at a really deep level, and once I started to listen to just even a little bit, I changed my thinking around, and everything was different. Absolutely everything. My life, 5 years in depression. So you can imagine, if understanding law of attraction, when you're in depression and grief, nothing good can come into your life, because the law of attraction is just in every way. We all get whatever we're vibrating at an energetic level comes back to us. So if we're in grief and we're depressed, we get more of that. And it was a very confusing time for me, because I had been used to having such a wonderful life. But now every decision I made wasn't a very good decision, because I was making decisions, important decisions for me and my children, from this place of deep grief, from deep despair. And the law of attraction was giving me more of what I was thinking. And so my life just kept getting worse and worse. My health got, into a severe place. My finances into a severe place. Everything bad that you can think of just kept getting worse. I'm sure there were more. I'm sure there were worse things that could have happened, but it was pretty bad. And so once I learned about law of attraction, and I understood about this perspective on death, and I understood about our emotional guidance system, where if you want a good and happy life, you have to be happy. It's illogical to expect wonderful things to come. Now that I understand this theory, wonderful things to come when you're in a negative place. It just can't happen, because the whole universe is based on energy. It's based on vibration. So, and depression is a whole other topic, but for me, it was like I could hardly breathe. I just had such a hard time having energy. I was exhausted, and I just was, depression is like that. It just saps the life out of you, literally. You feel like you cannot breathe most of the time. And on top of the depression, I had anxiety attacks about, how was I ever going to manage, etc. Mm-hmm. So, and my therapist did not have a perspective on death. She just, which is what most therapy is like, just allowed me to talk about how terrible my life was. And that lasted for a long time, for 4 years. As a therapist now, I would never allow a client to do that. It's not a healthy thing to do. In fact, I rarely, I like to know just a little bit about somebody, just that they have something they want to clear, and I don't need to know the whole story, because the more you tell a story, the more entrenched it gets. So, so my whole perspective on death is completely different now. absolutely different. I understand it in a way that's so profound. Even suicide is, that's a really big topic. That's connected to depression, because most people who are suicidal are in depression, I would say. Yeah. And there was a time when I had, I had access to thoughts like that, which totally baffled me, because I had never had thoughts like that before, ever. But what happens when you are in depression and you're entrenched in it, the universe just keeps giving you more thoughts like that, and they become more aggressive in terms of the intensity of their negativity. So a person who's suicidal is literally thinking about how they can feel better all the time by finding a way to end their life. And, all the creative ways they could go about doing that, because the goal for them is to feel better. And I totally understand suicide now, because someone who's suicidal is actually a pretty healthy person at some level, because they know that this is not good. They know it's not good to feel like this, and they want to find a way out, but they can't find a way out in their physical form. They literally cannot. I was a trained psychologist at a doctorate level when this happened. Imagine all of the skills I should have had, but really, I don't really even see my psychology as a field that I embrace much anymore, because so much of what's taught there it's not what I believe, and it's not what helps people. And I don't mean to bash in any way or criticize the psychology field, but they're very entrenched in rules and regulations and what you can and can't do, whether it's helpful or not to the client. And so I don't even know. I'd like to even come up with another name for what I actually do now. When I call myself a psychologist, it's not really accurate, because it's not what I know now is not what gets taught in graduate school at all. None of it. at least when I was there. And I think it's still the same. So suicide is just a way for people to move into a place of feeling good. And really, I think that all deaths are a suicide in some level. Like, people at a very deep level know they're going to transition often, Yeah. I don't know if it's all the time and they're conscious of it, but I think my husband was. I think, at a deep level, he knew he was transitioning. There came a point where he just knew that his body could no longer repair itself, and because the disease had taken over, and so he decided when he was going to die. Literally, I thought he was going to die on my birthday, which was November 3rd, and he ended up dying on a Sunday, which was the quietest day of the month, in the fall, November 9th. And it was the most peaceful death. We literally watched him take his last breaths, my kids and I. And it was so interesting for me to see his physical body no more than an hour after he had died. You could see that his spirit had left. He no longer looked like the man I had married. He was devoid of any spirit. It was just an empty vessel. And that was such an enlightening thing for me to see that. I guess you see that in funerals all the time, where people's bodies are shown. Mm-hmm. But when it's somebody as close to you as a mate that you adore, you really see this lack of spirit in that human form, and that it was just a vessel for him to live his spiritual being. So I got that, but I didn't have the perspective I have now about death. And so now whenever I counsel people that have suicide thoughts, and, I work with teenagers, and it's interesting the amount of, the number of teenagers that I've worked with that have had suicidal thoughts. It's a population that is so sure that life should be better than it is. Most teenagers don't feel free. They're in schools where they don't feel, most of the time, very good about being. They're not doing things that they really want to do most of the time. There's all kinds of relationship issues often at the teenage level. And there's so many teenagers that have these thoughts of suicide. And I now look at them as pretty healthy beings because they know that life should be different. They get that, but they don't quite know how to get to being happy. Because at a deep level, we all know that life is supposed to be happy. We're freedom-seeking beings. And a lot of people in that particular population don't feel very free. At least the ones I worked with. And, not all of them. It's a complete generalization, but it's surprising how many. So anybody that's suicidal is just somebody that's wanting to feel better. So I don't see it as a bad thing anymore. It's a very healthy person. And if you're entrenched in the medical system and in the psychological system, there's no way for you to get better. Most people don't get better by going through those systems. They find another path, a spiritual path of some sort, like I did. My whole psychology background didn't help me in this death experience at all. My whole understanding of the medical system didn't help me. I just was being given drugs, and that never helps. Antidepressants they don't make you better. They stop you from feeling. They stop you from understanding what your guidance system is trying to tell you. So I no longer see death as the loss, in that loss and grief perspective anymore. I see it as a delicious thing, to be honest. I'm looking forward to dying, even though I have lots more living to do. But when you die, you move into pure, positive, non-physical energy. All your worries and everything you've been fretting about are released when you die. Now, when I think about that, my husband, I was so happy to think that, to know that. He didn't have to worry about what to make for dinner anymore. He didn't have to worry about trying to figure out what to do with his body that was leaving him, was kind of giving out on him. And he didn't have to fret anymore about, he was a writer, what to write about or how to get through writing blocks, and all of that stuff was just gone, Yeah. So I just love the idea of him being this free spirit, which he always wanted to be, with no worries, and able to inspire others in non-physical. I mean, to me, that's an uplifting story compared to where I was, Yeah. And no matter who it is that dies, people talk about when your child dies, that it's very difficult, or your mate. Those seem to be the ones that people grieve about the most. But if we understand that there is no death, that this child that's transitioned is just moving on to another story, to another experience, to another life, we're eternal. I think that all of us can be more at peace with this topic, that, when you hear I feel a bit odd in most crowds, because when somebody says, oh, my mother died, and they're going on about how terrible that is, I never see it as terrible anymore. Usually I don't always have an opportunity to say, wow, isn't that amazing that, she's, all her worries are gone, she's in non-physical, you can chat with her now. That doesn't go over very big in North American culture because people are so stuck in this loss thing. But, it's coming.
Yeah.
Every idea like this takes time to become part of the mainstream culture. And, when I was teaching phys ed when I was 20, I was teaching yoga that nobody heard of before, except a few odd people. And it was considered odd and very unusual. And it's taken 20 years, but there's a yoga studio on every corner. Or recycling. I mean, I was recycling 30 years ago when nobody seemed to be doing it. It was unusual, Yeah. And now everybody cares about that, So it takes time for these ideas to evolve. And so I don't fret about it or worry about it. But I like to get the word out that it doesn't have to be the angst, the death experience for the people that are still in physical form doesn't have to be the angst that I went through. They don't have to see it the way I saw it and go through what I went through. And so one of my professors, when I was, I guess, in my doctorate program, he said that his friend's son had passed away and he never grieved for a moment about his son's passing. And I remember hearing that in the lecture that this professor was saying, and I thought to myself, are you crazy? Like, what do you mean, I thought that's nuts, that somebody could lose somebody that they loved like that and not feel any grief. But I now get that, Yeah. And I'm not sure if I could be quite with no grief, but when you really have this inbred in you and understand it at this high, very broad perspective, it can be like that. Somebody moves into non-physical and we can celebrate that. And we can be so happy for them. And our transition to our next experience in life can be so, smooth. In India, I was talking to somebody who just got back from India, and I've been coming all the way around to that when I first mentioned it. When what they do is they bring people who have died to the river, and they have beds by the river, and they burn all the bodies. And then they put the bodies in the river with all the ashes and the bones. And it's all in public, and everybody can watch it, and it's all out there, and there's like lots of bodies down by the river. I saw some pictures, and I thought, well, that's such a much healthier way to look at death. That it's that ashes to ashes, the ashes just get put in the river and become part of the stream of life again. So I'm really glad I have this perspective now. And I really would love more people to have it, because what I went through, it sucked, to be honest.
Yeah.
It was something I never imagined that people could feel that bad. And I went through it, but I didn't have to go through it because I didn't have the right perspective. I didn't have a perspective that really makes, this perspective makes so much sense to me. It gives us an understanding of the ebb and flow of life, that we come and we go, that we take this life experience way too seriously, that it's we're here for joy and then we're out, and we're here for joy and a wonderful life and we're out, you know.
Yeah.
And but if you think that this is the only lifetime you ever have, and you have to rush through everything because you have a million things to do, it's a different life experience than someone who just goes with the flow. Because when you go with the flow of life, the universe, you have the leverage of the universe, because that's how we're supposed to live. We're supposed to live a happy life. Is supposed to be fun, and we're supposed to be happy, and the transition's supposed to be happy. So I feel good about the fact that my husband's transition was pretty happy. You know, he had all his friends around him, and everybody said goodbye in their way. And the part that I didn't have was how to manage when he actually moved into non-physical. So that, you know, that is the piece that I think most of us are missing in this really huge issue of the death experience. So, yes, I've been going on and on.
Yeah, that's really great stuff, and I appreciate that. And it reminded me of when I lost a friend in college. The grief counselor was saying there's no wrong or right way to grieve. And even though I'd been through that experience before, I'd never heard it put that way. And it was like taking a load off your shoulders, because some people do like to celebrate, and some people do think it's the proper response to cry for a year or however long it takes. And I like that a lot of people like to celebrate, you know, their life.
Well, when you understand law of attraction, and you really get that everything that comes to you is a response to how you're feeling, then for me anyway, I'd like to leave behind the year of grieving because there's nothing good about it. It doesn't feel good to be crying all the time.
Yeah.
It sucks. Because your thoughts are all about everything else except joy, and everything else about the fact that this person has transitioned and is in a good place, you know. Mm-hmm. So if I would have, here's what I would have liked to have happened for me now that I know, you know, and this is what I do with people who have someone that's transitioned. They will come into my office or we do it on the phone. And part of Journey Work, which is the therapy that I now use, most of the time I combine it with Law of Attraction teachings. But there's a part of the process that's called the campfire process, where you bring the person that you really want to talk to a campfire. So you have a beautiful fire. It's a symbol of unconditional love and acceptance. And you're at the fire, you know, the present you is at the fire. And the person that's transitioned is at the fire. So in my case, my husband would be at the fire. If I could have had this done the first week, like right away after my husband died, I could have saved myself 5 years of absolute drama and trauma. And I literally lost those 5 years of my life. There was nothing much good that came out of it because I was in that kind of negative emotion so much. So the process is that, so my husband's name was Russell. So you first of all, you get to say everything you want to say. This is all guided visualization. It's in your, you know, and you're imagining that this person is across from you. And I have literally done this many times with him since I learned this work. And you just spill out your heart, everything you want to say to him. In my case, it's him. And you just talk and talk and talk. I had like hours of stuff I wanted to talk to him about. And then you get him to respond from that non-physical, pure loving place. And when the person responds from that place, they say things like, in my case, Joni, I'm here. I'm right here. I'm right with you. I'm watching everything you're doing. I adore you. I love you. There's nothing about our life together that I don't absolutely celebrate. Anytime you have a question about the kids, I want you to ask me. I'm here, literally. You know that butterfly you saw yesterday? Well, that was me. And I get to respond. Oh my God, was it really? That's amazing. Oh, well, tell me what I should do about Ella's horse lessons. You know, can you help me with that? And he responds, you know, well, listen, you know, I've heard about this place not far from home. Keep your eye open for it. It's there, and it'll be perfect for her. And you go back and forth like that with this person in guided visualization. You're literally, you know, the therapist is guiding you. I now can do it on my own because I don't need the help, and you do it until you come to complete peace. And after that process, like within an hour, you can feel that the grief or the angst that you were feeling is lifted. It's the most deeply healing experience for clearing anything I've ever seen. And my husband continues to say wonderful things. You know, he keeps reminding me, he says, you know, don't forget, you know, whenever you're feeling positive, that's the direction you need to go. And he's telling me, you know, like when you feel happy, that's it, sweetie. And, you know, he talks to me as though he literally was in physical form. Mm-hmm. And it feels like that at the spiritual level. It feels like you're not missing anything, you know, and you can literally feel him hugging. I can feel him hugging me. I can just feel him being close to me. And it is the most liberating of conversations you can ever have. I'm just so grateful that I know this work, because everything that happens in my physical life, I can clear it with this work, you know. And I have my husband at the campfire often, even now. And, you know, like it's, you know, 1997 was a long, long time ago. But it's like a relationship never ends. And I see that now. He's still present. He'll always be one of my very best friends. You know, like he was my best friend for 20 years, and he's still my best friend. He's still my lover of sorts, you know. It's not quite the same, but it's like he still loves me with that intensity, that unconditional love that he had. And so, you know, when you have tools like this, you don't have to suffer. And I don't ever, life is not supposed to be about suffering. I don't advocate it. It's not an option for me anymore. I choose happiness. I don't choose to suffer, but I have skills now to help me through that, and help me through the things I need to talk about, you know?
Yeah.
So that's and I encourage my kids to use this process as well, because they were so deeply attached to my husband, you know, their dad. Yeah. And he's always there for us. I know that. I can feel that. You know, so when people talk about that there's all kinds of ways to grieve, I would really like to encourage people to think about this a completely different way so that we can eliminate the suffering as much as possible. And Esther Hicks's husband, you know, who's the teacher of the law of attraction, he just passed away not long ago.
Yeah.
You know, it's February 2012 now, and he passed away in November. And I've heard her speak in public about his passing. And, you know, she has little moments of feeling the loss, you know, the sadness. There's even her, who's so entrenched in this knowing about there is no death, feels it at a level. But Jerry quickly reminds her that he's there. And he does that. You know, Esther speaks to hundreds of people. And Jerry literally does that in front of hundreds of people. He'll chime in, and she can hear him. And she says that to the crowd. So that immediately helps her. It's like a little journey process that she does in front of everybody, you know?
Yeah.
So we're so blessed. We're so lucky to have these skills on our planet now, you know?
Yeah.
All the books out there on death and dying and the lamentation and the sorrow and the grief, there's loads of books talking about how to cope with all this trauma and grief that honestly, like, we don't have to even go there now, you know? I'll never read another book
for
like
the
that.
book.
You know, it would be kind of cool. This would be a cool and fun thing to do, but, you know, document some of these stories that you can have with your non-physical transition people, you know?
Yeah.
Like my conversations with my husband, I would love to write them down. They would be very healing for anybody that had lost a loved one, you know? So that's just an idea that's come out of here, but...
It's a good idea.
Yeah. 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 So that's, you know, that's just a little bit more of an extension. Mm-hmm. Is there any other questions that you can think of coming out of this, Jonathan, or
I just wanted to add on that since I started doing the work that you've taught and shared, I've noticed that before I came across this, I would only be able to access this place when I was dreaming at night. And then I'd wake up in the morning and I'd try to remember parts of it. But now it's like you can access it while you're still awake. And it, you know, I've told people before that when I'm asleep at night, I'll, you know, talk to Marvin Gaye, Tupac, and Biggie, and Big L, and all the great artists who've passed, and it's just a great big party, and everyone's having fun, and they're saying, you can come here whenever you want, but you can go back too if you want, and it's always been, like you said, you have to be in that joyful state.
Yeah, well, you know, that's, yeah, for sure. Like, I think a lot of people, when they're dreaming, that can be part of it. But, you know, with journey work, what's really cool is that you can move into that joyful state, you know, once you kind of release some of the painful thinking that's happening. So I'm so glad that's brought you some relief, you know, because it's, well, I've worked with hundreds of people, thousands of people now, and honestly, they just feel so much better. And Jerry and Esther Hicks talk about, they've coined a term called the vortex. And the vortex is the happiest place that you can ever state. It's a happy state that you could ever be. It's absolute joy and excitement. And when you're in the vortex, you're in spirit. That's what the spirit world is like. And that's when all the wonderful things, that's when you know you're lined up with all the energy for things you want in life to come forth. Yeah. You know, so journey work allows you to be in the vortex. It helps you get out of the rut of negative thinking that's so prevalent in our culture. Most of us are in a rut of thinking that we don't even know we're there until we start to become conscious. And Journey Work helps you leave that rut and start to create a groove of joy and happiness and reaching for more. When you know about law of attraction, here's a really cool tip for everybody. Mm-hmm. When you're happy, when people are depressed, they're usually going to try to find some way to feel a bit better. Or, if they're angry or frustrated, they're usually going to make some effort to feel better. But where the real leverage is in terms of the universe is when you move from happiness into more happiness. That's
sorry.
When the universe...
I was hearing a bit of echo. Okay, we're back. A little technical blip there, but we were just having a good laugh about the people from the other side were wanting to chime in for a minute. But,
Oh, you're too funny, Jonathan. What I was saying is just sort of a really big tip for people who know that life is supposed to be great and they want that. And I was saying that if you're in a negative state like frustration or depression or anger, you'll usually make quite an effort to feel a bit better. You'll go for a walk, or you'll try to talk to a friend, or you'll see a counselor or something, right? Yeah. But most people don't, and there is some leverage in that. Any movement to feeling a bit better is a good thing. Mm-hmm. But where the real leverage is, where the real traction is in terms of being in absolute alignment, is when you move from happiness into more happiness, increased happiness. And most people don't, if they're happy, they won't make that effort to feel even happier. Mm. And we can always reach a higher state of joy. And that's when the real leverage happens. So that's just a really, for people who want to fine tune their understanding of law of attraction, that was a really big tip for me. Because I never really tried to move into a better feeling place if I was already feeling great, Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's great. I appreciate it, Joni. And our listeners out there, you can go to jonimcmahon.com to learn more and opt into her list, and you'll get an amazing 17-part series that is really wonderful and goes into more depth on the topics. Well, thank you, Joni. It was great to be here with you today, and you have a wonderful day.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate chatting with you today. Such an important topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You have a great spirit.
You too.
Bye.
Take care.